Hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of chapter 4, The Emergence of Social Work as a Profession. I had encouraged you in the previous video to look at this emergence of social work over a time period in certain eras. And we had looked at the one prior to 1915. Now the next one we're going to look at is titled Professional Emergence. The other one was moving from a volunteer movement to an occupation. From 1915 to 1950, social work began to emerge more as a profession, but it was not a smooth, just a smooth path. In 1915, though, something very important happened along this pathway. There was a national conference about charities and corrections. And at this national conference in 1915, there was a man by the name of Abraham Flexner. He was the man in the nation as far as the authority about what makes a profession. And he had already done this type of work with some other professions, and he was the recognized authority. Pretty much, if he recognized what you did as a profession, then it was a profession. He was well published on this. And one of his talks during that convention was actually, is social work a profession? Well, obviously all the social workers probably were on the edge of their seats waiting to hear, because it would be a huge deal to finally move from an occupation to a profession, and to more move towards the rank and the status of things like law and medicine. Well, he spelled out 6 criteria about an occupation that must meet these 6 criteria in order to be considered a profession. And they're in the text there on that page, and be sure you look through each of them. I'm just going to mention a couple. So in his talk, he talked about these 6 things. One of them was that they derived their raw material from science and learning. They tend to be self-organized, and they become increasingly altruistic in motivation. So as he's going through these and as he's making his comments, at the end of his speech, he states the fact that social work is not yet a profession. I'm sure that must have been very discouraging to all the social workers at the convention and others who heard afterwards. But he was very favorable towards social work. And he said that they're well along the path of becoming a profession. And in fact, he encouraged them to go out and finish building a profession. So while it was discouraging, on one hand, that they weren't there yet, they were strongly encouraged that they were on the path and they needed to keep moving in that direction. One of the things that a profession has too is a professional code of ethics. And social work was already working on this. In the 1920s, 1921, there were different versions of a code of ethics going around, but nothing yet had been formally adopted. And there wasn't at this point one national organization. That would not come about until 1955. But between 1915 and 1950, social work continued to develop. Within its what it was doing, there began to be associations like for research, social work for teachers, which was a forerunner of school research, social work, psychiatric services. Many different kind of subgroups of social workers began to be formed, and also different ways of doing social work. Not just individual casework, but group work. And so things began to progress and move along that way. Now the period from 1950 to 1970 is referred to as consolidating the gains. And again, another key moment occurred in 1957. You want to know that date. As obvious with anything having to do with the history of something, dates are very important, as well as people. In 1957, A man by the name of Ernest Greenwood wrote what was be referred to later as a classic article, Attributes of a Profession. Now, Ernest Greenwood was the Abraham Flexner of his day. He had 5 instead of 6 criteria by which an occupation becomes a profession. And he wrote this article. It wasn't at a conference or a convention, but he wrote this article. And in the article, he specifically addressed social work. And I actually want to read you a quote from that article. When we hold up social work against the model of the professions presented, it does not take long to decide whether to classify it within the professional or non-professional occupations. Social work is already a profession. It has too many points of congruence with the model to be classified otherwise. Yay! Social work made it. 1957. And because of his stature and his status, pretty much everyone accepted it then. There was still more work to do. This is 1957. It wasn't until 1955 that social work finally had one unified national organization, the NASW, the National Association of Social Workers. And actually it wasn't until 1960 that a code of ethics, which is important to have as a profession, was finally formally adopted. Now, social work always had a code of ethics in one form or another as it was going around. But it wasn't until 1960 that we finally had and finally formally adopted the code of ethics. All right. Now the last little bit, 1970 to the present. It's titled Turning Away from the Elitist Model. So something began to happen. There began to be tension amongst social workers. There were those who felt that, we should strive to be, like the lawyers and like the doctors. And there was others within the social work profession said, yeah, there's some good things about that, but we don't want to move too far away from our mission, which is, to enhance the social well-being of all individuals, and especially of those who are oppressed, who are discriminated against, who are the poorest of the poor and the vulnerable. Well, that's a lot of messy work, and also about bringing about social change. Social workers often would confront society with things that weren't right, that were discriminatory or oppressive. Well, society doesn't necessarily like to hear that message. So there was kind of a division among social workers about how, we should proceed. Should we get the nice office with the $1,500 leather chair, only take people who can pay, for the services themselves or who have insurance, and not really be concerned about changing society? We'll just treat these individual people who can afford our services. And so there's still some tension even to the present day of that still going on now. But there was some changes that were happening within that too. Up until 1970, even though people might have a bachelor's degree in social work and actually doing social work, they were not considered by the NSAW to be full professional social workers. Again, it was kind of that thing that, well, we want just the highest of degrees as far as for anyone to be considered a actual, professional social worker. But they began to see that that really wasn't very realistic and wasn't really rooted in reality. There were thousands of people trained as social workers, had the bachelor's in social work, and were doing the work. So in 1970, the NSAW reversed their position, and they welcomed into their membership all those who had the bachelor's degree and were working as social workers, and then said that they indeed could consider and promote and publish themselves as full social workers. So there was some tension during that time, and still lingers, to today. One way it's expressed today is that there's a growing number of social workers who do private practice, which means that they're not working for an agency, they're not working in a school or a hospital. They do counseling, they do therapy, they have 30 or 40 clients, and they charge higher fees, and that's what they work with. They're not trying to change society. They're not reaching into vulnerable populations as far as those who are living in poverty. They're certainly doing good work with those individuals, but some in social work would say that they've kind of separated themselves from some of the core mission of social work as a profession. So some of this tension still going on today. So as you read this chapter, as always, be sure to look at everything that's in italics at the back of the chapter. Read and review those key concepts and ideas. And for this chapter, look at it in these blocks of time and these eras. Know who the people are, what they were known for, and what the key events were happening in terms of social work moving from a volunteer movement to an occupation to a profession. Okay, that's it. Thank you.